on in the DOJ investigation, as soon as we started learning about the gender responsive and trauma-informed principles that research provides us, we quickly knew that we needed to take a look at our restrictive housing. And since 2013, we've reduced our use of restrictive housing at Tutwiler by 75%, which is significant. One of the reasons we've been able to do that is because of the reduction in institutional misconducts. And several variables have impacted that reduction. First of all, obviously the programming that we have in place, programming that stems from substance abuse, parenting, relationship skills, all of those types of things that are identified as needs through the Women's Risk Needs Assessment. We now have evidence-based programs for the women to enroll in to address those needs. And by evidence-based, what that clearly means is these programs have been designed with fidelity guidelines that can assure an agency like ours, if we facilitate them according to the guidelines provided, we should see a return on our investment. And we are seeing that so far. So we can see that the institutional misconducts or major disciplinaries have decreased by more than 50% since we implemented our programming and our new behavior intervention strategies. So what kind of behavior intervention strategies are we talking about? If we're not using restrictive housing, roundtable discussions. If there's a violation committed by 2 or 3 women, a staff member will assemble them in a roundtable and have a discussion around how they could avoid having that reaction in the future and committing similar violations. Or it might involve a report writing about how that individual might be able to avoid exhibiting behaviors like that in the future. Different strategies that we've learned to be more successful for women than restrictive housing. And then finally, just to remind everyone of some of the infrastructure challenges that we do have at Tutwiler. It's a 77-year-old facility. The overall design of the facility is staff labor intensive. And of course, when it was designed in the 1940s, programming, rehabilitation, healthcare priorities weren't necessarily at the top of the list. So we've had to take the minimal space that we have, which is minimal, and do some cosmetic renovations to try to help us support some of these reform changes that we've put into place. So with that, I'll just close by saying that we feel like a lot of the reform efforts that we have been able to effect at Tutwiler can easily be replicated in our male facilities with minor changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Appreciate that. Although the challenges that we face in our male facilities are somewhat different, obviously, from what we face in our female facilities, I hope that what you've heard from Dr. Williams' presentation at least illustrates a willingness on the Department of Corrections side to work with our partners to address those issues that are facing our correctional facilities. It demonstrates a willingness on our part to work for meaningful improvements in our correctional facilities. And in fact, too, we can thank the Alabama legislature. Some of you might remember several years ago, there was an appropriation to Tutwiler Women's Facility, and we were able to do some upgrades at Tutwiler as a result of that. So thanks to the Alabama legislature. Our next presenter is Colonel Matthew Brand. Colonel Brand is the Associate Commissioner of Administrations in our department. Colonel Brand joined the Alabama Department of Corrections in 2015 after serving 27 years in the United States Air Force. Colonel Brand oversees the Departmental Personnel Division, in addition to our IT division and our training division. So the Personnel Division is responsible for the hiring and retention plan that the Department of Corrections has recently implemented. Colonel Brand.
Thank you, Jeff. Good afternoon, everybody. As Commissioner Williams mentioned, I did spend 27 years in the Air Force, and for purposes of this briefing, where I'm going to talk about not just staffing, but also professional development, I wanted to talk about some of the things I did in the Air Force, particularly on the professional and leadership development side. I did spend 3 years on the faculty of the Army's Command and called Staff College, where they develop their leaders, essentially from all four services, majors and lieutenant commanders, to serve on command and staff positions at higher levels of authority. And then my last job in my career was right over here at Maxwell Air Force Base, where I was on the Air War College faculty, doing the same thing for lieutenant colonels and colonels from all four services, developing their leadership ability to move on to positions of staff and command at the group and wing command level or brigade command level in the Army. So the Commissioner Dunn knew this about me, and it's one of the primary reasons he interviewed me initially, because as he put it in our interview, he landed in the department early in 2015 and noticed there was not really a deliberate professional development program for our department. We had some leadership courses, one or two, and there was a lot of ad hoc training done by individuals on their own to get developed, but we didn't have a holistic program to develop folks. In fact, he said, if there's a cadet or trainee over at Central Academy right now, that 25 or 30 years wants my job, or what was in my job at the time, we need to, where do we deliberately develop that person along that path as they promote through the department, prepare themselves for positions of higher authority on the leadership side. So that's how I was initially hired to do that, to build a program, and then subsequently got personnel and IT under my umbrella as well. So I'm going to talk about two things predominantly today, starting with professional development and then staffing. But I wanted to set in context here with our strategic plan, which we unveiled earlier this year. And so those two things I'm going to discuss. Professional development affects culture, improving the culture in our facilities, in our department, and then of course staffing is one of our focus areas too. I don't want to ignore infrastructure and programming. You're very well aware some of the things we're doing on the infrastructure side, and of course programming is important here, but for my purposes today, I'm going to talk staffing and culture. And the final thing I'll see on this plan is just see it's a Venn diagram, it's all connected here. Everything affects everything else that we're trying to do with our focus areas. You cannot effectively do programming if you have inadequate infrastructure or low staffing. And culture is kind of the undergirding, the bed, if you will, the work environment, the DOC environment in our facilities that everything else lives and works within. So all that is very important. I'm going to first talk about professional development and some of the things we've done. And so you'll see these variety of courses here, and I've listed these courses effectively from the senior courses for our senior staff on down to our more junior leaders in the department. And then to the right, you'll see the dates there when these courses were implemented. So of course the top one started in 2005 before Commissioner Dunn and I arrived in the department. That's an annual conference where all of our wardens, deputy wardens, division directors, deputy division directors, and that level of staff and senior staff get together once a year, about 2.5 days, and have a leadership conference. We just finished ours last week, as a matter of fact. It was very successful. We also have to improve upon that. So that was here existing when I was hired. And I didn't know the button, let's see here. Can you just pull my review back up, sorry. And so what we did was we said, okay, we have this, we have a new supervisor course, which was 1 week long for new supervisors. Now where do we go from here? So the Commissioner and I put our heads together and said, let's start with the sergeant level. That's the first line level of supervisor within our facilities. And let's start there and build that course. And so we built a 2-week course for our sergeants called the Sergeant's Academy, which you see down there near the bottom. And then at the same time, started working some other aspects. The Commissioner also said, hey, we need to build this in leadership development top to bottom, and our executive staff needs it as well. So we contracted out for a business consulting firm locally here to come in, take the 14 of us that were on the executive staff, the associate commissioners, the deputy commissioners, the commissioner, the chief of staff, everyone went through. Basically, it was 1 year long. Once a month, we went off-site together and did development of our own to try to kind of come together as a leadership team at the top and improve ourselves at the same time that I was building these other courses along with the help of the training staff. And so, go 2 down from the top, Senior Leadership Academy. So in addition to this once a year conference, we decided we need some more classroom leadership development for our wardens and our other senior staff on the non-security side. And so we take all of the wardens, all the associate wardens, the equivalent on the support side is about 75 folks. We divide them into 3 groups of about 25, and we have 3 days in the classroom where we talk leadership. We're gonna do that in the springtime. The top conference there is usually in the fall, so it's twice a year that we can dedicate to our senior leaders, once in more of a small room, Socratic style, back and forth, and then one larger conference with about 100 people there on top. The Intermediate Leadership Academy, those next 2 in the forward program, which is our future warden program, those are for intermediate level supervisors. So 1 step below our warden force and our division director force, but one step above our first line supervisors. So lieutenants and captains and their equivalents attend this course. And it's 2 weeks long, and intentionally the thread we try to weave through all this training is transformational leadership. That's becoming transformational leaders. Corrections in general tends to be transactional. That is carrot and stick, reward punishment styles of leading. That's not just in our state, it's nationally. And the military is somewhat like that too, especially pre-1980s. And so we're trying to move forward into more transformational, that is, more empathetic style of leading, doing behaviors such as having individual consideration for subordinates, knowing your staff, they're not just a number or a billet, they're individual, what their needs are, their wants, their desires in the department, that kind of thing. And then also having inspirational motivation either through words or actions you do as a leader to basically inspire your subordinates to do greater things. And if you do all those things right, hopefully you can become and have idealized influence with your subordinates and have that bond with those subordinates that want to follow you just because of the relationship you have with them. And that's what we're trying to thread between all of these leadership courses. Of course, we talk about communication, conflict resolution. We have leadership field reviews, group projects. We go on Maxwell Air Force Base for a small team tactical leadership exercise that we partner with the base on that. So there's a lot of things in there, but threaded throughout all of that is trying to become transformational leaders. The 2007 course here, the NIC course, was in existence. It's a 1-week course we give all new supervisors, and that was the other course that was here when I came on. And then finally, we're debuting this fall a Basic Leadership Academy, which is essentially a Sergeant's Academy equivalent for our non-security forces. And finally, a refresher course. So graduates from the Sergeant's Academy and the Intermediate Leadership Academy can come back, in follow-on years and get sort of a brush-up 3-day refresher course on leadership. And we get feedback from them as well. How did it work out there at the facility, trying these techniques and things, and then at the same time giving them some new packaged courses for a different way to perspective and different look at transformational leadership. So that's essentially the plate we've developed. We're not done yet. I did tell the commissioner that we're pretty much at interim operational capability with this course. It can stand on its own 2 feet now because it runs pretty much top to bottom, but we're going to add several things in the future as we go forward. Thank you. Whoever changed that slide for me. Staffing. So obviously, we're all well aware staffing plummeted over the last 3 years, up through last year, and it's pretty much desperate times, as you're all well aware, in our facilities in terms of our number of staff. And so last year we did several things, of which we hired 3 study groups to take a look at our department. The first one, the Savage study, it's named after a couple called their last name is Savage, and their industry